Over these past 5 years of aspiring to be a filmmaker, I have learned that for every new movie that gets released in theaters every week, the critics separate them into 3 distinct categories. The first category is the type of movie which gets critically acclaimed by almost anyone who sees it and becomes a surefire contender for the incoming award season. The second category is the type of movie that gets condemned for its terrible execution, lazy writing, and mishandling of its subject material. One even questions why the critical and commercial flop even exists in the first place. However, the final category is the type of movie that is more difficult to describe than the first 2 categories. This is a movie that gets a divided reaction from both critics and audiences, which opens it up to a multitude of possibilities in terms of success or failure. From what I've seen, some of them involve at least one of their actors getting a Best Supporting Actor nomination, or having their extremely noticeable flaws being studied in a college course that specializes in how not to artistically address social issues through filmmaking. What I have recently discovered about this film category is that it has the ability to build a strong fan base that revels in what makes it so memorable, regardless of whether it is good or bad, which is the quintessential definition of a cult film. The way I found that out is through watching a movie that I feel has the potential to become the new cult film in the years to come. By describing the most inspiring qualities of the movie Capone, I will take you through how it defines the characteristics of a cult film, along with why it will have such a large impact on the audience it builds. Capone is written and directed by Josh Trank, and it tells the story of a version of Al Capone, played by Tom Hardy, who has recently been released from prison and living in Florida under government watch. He's beginning to show signs of early onset dementia brought on by his rapidly advancing neurosyphilis. While his family does the best that they can to make him comfortable in the midst of his bankruptcy, he soon begins to experience frightening hallucinations about his glory days, which has him question whether he has hidden $10 million for his family to inherit after he is gone. This is not the typical Al Capone movie that we as an audience are all used to seeing in theaters. He doesn't charm his way out of a bad situation or shoots all his adversaries in the most stylish way possible, while the movie holds our hands all the way to a happy ending. This is less The Untouchables than it is of an episode of Twin Peaks. That Lynchian influence is shown in full effect based on the role of Capone's doctor played by Lynch collaborator Kyle MacLachlan, and the cinematography done by regular Lynch DP Peter Deming. According to LiveAbout.com, the first characteristics that implies that a movie has cult status is that it was released outside of mainstream Hollywood practices, essentially being a low-budget movie in limited release. Capone was originally going to be released in theaters in 2018, but it struggled to pick up distribution and was shelved for more than a year. After being picked up by Vertical Entertainment in 2020, its release got delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, it went straight to streaming on video on demand in May 2020. The fact that it was easily accessible during a time when we were all quarantined in our homes helped to gain a lot of viewership and make a lot of money through online sales. It managed to grow $2.5 million through its online opening weekend. That was always something I was amazed by, considering the movie generates some strong reactions in people, which is a second characteristic of a cult film. In its release, Capone got extremely polarizing reactions from critics and audiences alike. It was heavily criticized for having a plot that essentially went nowhere in terms of Capone struggling to find the last of his hidden fortunes. Its inconsequential narrative couldn't even compare to the fact that Tom Hardy gives a performance that leaves viewers in a state of confusion and shock. His Capone plays more as a pale movie monster from the 1930s with a voice that sounds like a combination of Nick Nolte and Bugs Bunny. Even though some viewers found this off-putting, there were rows of people who appreciated his commitment to properly portraying a man who is a prisoner of his own dying body. According to film critic Chris Stuckman, he stated in his review that the movie has cult potential, where a lot of people could be rewatching it, especially just for the sake of Tom Hardy's insane performance. Cult movies always have that one character who steals the scene with instantly quotable lines and a memorable lasting impression. Hardy skillfully chews up the scenery while sputtering Italian insults at his family before observing fractured memories of his past with a newfound childlike innocence. There are definitely people who are going to remember his take on this once great gangster that is both undignified and unsympathetic. However, Hardy is not the person in this movie who will gain cult status, which brings us to our final characteristic, the reputation of writer-director Josh Trank. Trank has been a filmmaker for a decade and has had a tumultuous relationship with Hollywood. He broke into the scene with his debut movie Chronicle, which was about a group of teenagers who gained telekinetic abilities with dire consequences. Unfortunately, that movie wasn't able to start a new franchise with his success, so he moved on with his new iteration of Fantastic Four. His dark and gritty version saw the team as 4 people crawling themselves out of hell after they get their mutated powers, which was how he saw himself all the time. That movie turned out to be a colossal bomb, and Trank became ostracized from the one place he thought he felt at home at. However, as soon as he thought about the image of Al Capone becoming disassociated from his glory days, he figured out that his true calling was to make unique, singular films that were weird enough to be looked back on for a long time. Now that he has bounced back from his career hiatus with his own individualistic perspective and style that deals with sympathetic villains, body horror, and deconstruction of real-life mythic figures, Now he has bounced back from his career hiatus with his own individualistic perspective and style that deals with sympathetic villains, body horror, and deconstruction of real-life mythic figures. According to filmsite.com, that signature style of directing gets recognized by college campuses, midnight movie crowds, and independent film lovers, much like those of his influences like David Lynch, the Coen brothers, and John Waters. His name has the potential to float around the cult movie community and become a modern household name. In the end, there will always be movies that people are going to absolutely love forever, and there will always be movies that people will despise forever. I feel like I'm more drawn towards cult films that, depending on whether they're good or not, thrive on their willingness to deconstruct the genre that they initially set up and reveal some inner truths within their unconventional narratives. Capone might not have had a great start when it got released, but its fan base and growing appreciation will come to fruition in the years to come.